In the cold divorce court, my father shot up, pointing at my mother. "You are a liar." I stood up too. "Your Honor, I submitted something last night." The judge looked up, opened the envelope I'd sent, and then she laughed. It wasn't humor. It was the sharp sound of audacity being exposed. That dry, short laugh was the death knell for his corporate empire. I am Rain Mercer, 29 years old, and I was sitting in the back row of hell. They call it Hollis County Courthouse, Department 3B, divorce proceedings. But it was hell, all the same. It had the right lighting for it, a sickly, greenish-pale fluorescence that made everyone look like they were underwater, drowning slowly. The air was thick with the smell of old floor wax, stale coffee from a pot that had been burning for hours in a nearby office, and the metallic tang of unspoken resentment. The sound of the room was a low-grade hum from the ventilation, punctuated by the sharp, self-important click of a lawyer's heels on the marble floor outside the doors. I sat alone, dead center in the last row of polished oak benches. The wood was cold and hard against my back. My hands were clamped around a dark blue, rigid file folder, not the one that mattered. That one was already delivered. But a physical totem, something to anchor me. Inside it was just a copy of my own employment contract with Calder and Bray Systems, a single sheet of paper that outlined my duties as a risk analyst, a reminder of who they thought I was. My mother, Helen, sat at the plaintiff's table. She was a study in beige, as if she'd tried to fade into the courtroom's neutral-toned walls. Her lawyer, a man with a sympathetic tilt to his head and a vulture's patience, sat beside her. At the defendant's table was my father, Graham Mercer, CEO of Calder and Bray Systems. He was not beige. He was a monument of industry in a $4,000 bespoke suit, exuding a field of energy that demanded attention, that bent the very air of the room toward him. He looked like he was about to chair a hostile takeover, not dissolve a 30-year marriage. The proceedings had been a slow, grinding process of financial disclosures, or in my father's case, financial obfuscations. His lawyer, a shark in a woman's suit, was currently detailing my mother's unreasonable demands for spousal support, which, given Mrs. Mercer's lack of contribution to the company's success, that's when my mother's lawyer finally interrupted, his voice smooth but firm. "Objection, Your Honor. Counsel is mischaracterizing my client's 30-year partnership as lack of contribution. Furthermore, we have yet to see the full, unredacted financials from the private holding companies Mr. Mercer insists are separate from the marital assets." My father's composure, that famous granite-like calm he displayed for financial news networks, finally cracked. It wasn't a gradual thing. It was an explosion. He shot to his feet, knocking his heavy oak chair backward with a thud that echoed like a gunshot in the tense quiet. His face went from boardroom tan to a blotchy, dangerous crimson. He pointed a finger, a thick, commanding finger that had silenced board members and sent VPs scrambling, directly at my mother. "You," he roared, and the room flinched. "You are a liar. You are a vindictive, grasping liar. You're destroying the family and you're trying to destroy my company." The court reporter's fingers flew, capturing the venom. My mother shrank, her shoulders hunching. Her lawyer put a hand on her arm, whispering, "Don't react, Helen. This is what he wants. Let him implode." But I saw her hand, the one hidden in her lap, beneath the beige wool sleeve. It wasn't just trembling. It was vibrating, a rapid, palsied tremor that spoke of years of this, years of being roared into silence, of being diminished, of being told her reality was a lie. That tremor traveled from her hand, up my spine, and into my chest. The pressure built, hot and sudden. "Order!" The voice of Judge Miriam Keats cut through the echo of my father's rage. She was a small woman, made larger by the black robes and the elevated bench. She didn't bang her gavel. She just held it, her knuckles white. "Mr. Mercer, you will sit down. You will not address the plaintiff directly again. One more outburst like that, and you will be spending the rest of this hearing in contempt. My father, breathing hard, slowly retrieved his chair and sat, yanking his suit jacket straight with a violent tug. He was furious, but more than that, he was embarrassed. He had lost control, and in his world, that was the only cardinal sin. The room settled back into its nervous hum. The lawyer for my mother prepared to speak. But the tremor in my mother's hand hadn't stopped. I stood up. The scrape of my own chair felt obscenely loud. Every head in the room turned. My father's, my mother's, the lawyer's, Judge Keats's. "Your Honor," I said. My voice was tight, but it didn't shake. I was, after all, an analyst. I dealt in facts, not volume. Judge Keats's gaze was sharp, annoyed. "Who are you? The gallery is to remain silent." "My name is Rain Mercer, Your Honor. I am the daughter of the plaintiff and the defendant. I am also an employee of Calder and Bray Systems." I held up the blue file folder. "I wish to be heard as a witness with pertinent information regarding the financial assets in question." A low murmur rippled through the lawyer's assistants. My father's head whipped around. His face, which had been settling back into its mask of corporate indignation, transformed. The look he gave me was not anger, it was pure, unadulterated shock, followed by a wave of incandescent rage that was somehow more terrifying for its silence. Then he laughed, a short, barking laugh of utter contempt. "Your Honor, this is absurd," he boomed, getting to his feet again, though more slowly this time, projecting dominance. "This is a pathetic, orchestrated piece of theater. My daughter," he said the word like it was a contaminant, "is a junior-level data analyst. She was hired 3 years ago out of pity. She knows nothing about my business. She's emotional. This is a tactic by her mother to leverage our relationship against me." "She knows nothing," he repeated, staring directly at me, his eyes 2 chips of ice. "Sit down, Rain. You're embarrassing yourself." I didn't look at him. I kept my eyes locked on Judge Keats. The pressure in my chest wasn't fear. It was resolve. It was the click of a mechanism falling into place. "Your Honor," I said, my voice cutting cleanly through his dismissal, "I am aware of my father's assessment of my capabilities. It's why I've been able to do my work effectively." I let that hang in the air for 1, 2, 3 beats. "Last night, at 11:52 p.m, I had a sealed, prioritized courier packet delivered directly to your chambers. Under seal for Hollis Mercer. It contains a formal letter, a set of encrypted appendices, and a USB drive." My father's lawyer was instantly on her feet. "Objection! Ex parte communication. We move to strike whatever this is. This is completely improper procedure." Judge Keats held up a hand, silencing her. She looked at me, her expression unreadable. "You sent a packet to my chambers?" "Yes, Your Honor, addressed directly to you. The contents are a direct factual analysis of financial discrepancies I discovered during my work at Calder and Bray. Discrepancies that appear to directly route marital assets into unaudited shell corporations co-owned by other parties." My father's face went white. The blotchy red was gone, replaced by a pale, waxy sheen. "She's lying. She's violated her NDA. She's stolen proprietary data." "I have violated no NDA, Your Honor," I said, my voice cold and precise. "My employment contract, which I have here, contains no non-disclosure clause regarding the reporting of illegal activities or financial malfeasance, and I did not steal data. I analyzed the data I was given access to as part of my job in risk assessment. My findings, however, fall under the Whistleblower Protection Act as they pertain to potential SEC violations." The room was absolutely, perfectly still. The only sound was the ventilation. Judge Keats stared at me for a long time. Then, without breaking eye contact, she gestured to her clerk. "Mr. Davies, please retrieve the packet from my chambers delivered last night regarding this case." The clerk, a reedy man who looked terrified, scurried out of a side door. "This is a circus," my father's lawyer protested. "It is," Judge Keats agreed, her voice dry. "And I intend to find out who the ringmaster is. Sit down, counsel. Sit down. Mr. Mercer." They sat. The tension in the room was a physical thing, a high-frequency vibration you could feel in your teeth. My mother was staring at me, her eyes wide, her trembling hand now pressed to her mouth. The clerk returned. He held a large 9x12 manila envelope, thick and heavy, with a bright red, sealed Judicial Eyes Only sticker across the flap. He handed it to Judge Keats. She took it. She inspected the seal, then slid it open with a silver letter opener. She pulled out a stack of papers. On top was my letter. She put on a pair of thin, black-framed reading glasses and began to read. My father was vibrating in his chair, whispering furiously to his lawyer, who was whispering back just as fast. The judge read the first page. Her expression did not change. She turned to the second page. A small, tight line appeared between her eyebrows. She turned to the third, and then the fourth, which I knew was the first of the appendices. It was a data flow map, a clean spiderweb diagram showing funds moving from a C&B project reconciliation account to 3 smaller accounts, and from there into a single holding company, VCS Hatchery LLC. I saw the judge's eyes trace the lines. Then I saw it. It started at the corner of her mouth, a tiny, upward twitch. It wasn't a smile. It was the physical manifestation of a legal mind processing sheer, unadulterated audacity. She looked down at the other documents, the contact logs, the scanned images of a secondary ledger. Blurry, yes, but with dates and numbers that were horrifyingly legible. My father must have seen the expression too. He couldn't help himself. "It's fake!" he burst out, his voice cracking. "Whatever she gave you, it's faked documents. It's garbage. She's an unstable girl trying to get back at me." Judge Keats looked up. She slowly, deliberately, took off her reading glasses. She folded them and set them down on top of the flow chart. And then she laughed. It was not a warm laugh. It was not a laugh of humor. It was a dry, short, sharp bark of a laugh. The sound of a veteran judge who has seen every lie, every scam, every pathetic defense, and has just been presented with one so brazen, so incompetently arrogant, that it defied belief. The laugh cut off as quickly as it began. She leveled her gaze at my father. The silence that followed was heavier than any gavel. "Mr. Mercer?" she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "This first exhibit is a flowchart. The second is a series of wire transfer confirmations to a shell company. The third is a photograph of a ledger listing consulting fees paid by that same company, fees paid directly to your current co-defendant in a separate civil matter, Ms. Vivian Cross, all of which you just denied under oath 20 minutes ago." She leaned forward. "Are you absolutely 100% sure you want to continue this line of denial, Mr. Mercer, because your daughter, the analyst, has been extremely thorough?" The judge's laugh still hung in the air, a brittle, sharp echo in the suffocating silence of Department 3B. My father, Graham Mercer, looked like a man who had just been struck by lightning. His mouth was slightly open, his waxy pallor a stark contrast to the crimson rage of a moment before. He was staring at Judge Keats, but I knew he wasn't seeing her. He was seeing a new, terrifying reality spooling out in front of him. He was seeing the polished glass of his life begin to craze. My father's world was Calder and Bray Systems. It occupied 17 stories of steel and smoked glass on the Bryn Mawr waterfront, a monolith of corporate power that threw a long shadow over the older, brick-and-mortar buildings of the city. At night, its logo was lit in a cool, intelligent blue, and chiseled into the granite lintel above the revolving glass doors was the company motto, a phrase my father had coined himself, "Integrity Engineered." It was a beautiful lie. I hadn't joined Calder and Bray out of pity, as he'd spat at the judge. I was recruited 3 years ago, straight out of my master's program. My thesis on identifying micro-supply chain vulnerabilities had won a modest industry award and the head of risk analysis, a man who actually valued data over nepotism, had brought me in. My father had been pleased, not proud, but pleased. He saw it as a tidying up of loose ends. His problematic, overly serious daughter, finally tucked away safely inside his own fortress. On my first day, he'd called me up to his office on the 17th floor, the apex, his assistant called it. His office was vast, minimalist, and one entire wall was a sheet of glass overlooking the city and the harbor. It was designed to make everyone else feel small. "You're here," he said, not standing, just motioning for me to sit in a low, uncomfortable-looking chair. "Good. You'll do well, as long as you remember the rules." "What rules?" I'd asked. He'd leaned back, steepling his fingers. "This isn't college. Rain, we don't reward people for being the loudest one in the seminar. You're a Mercer. You're in the building." He gestured toward the private elevator that opened directly into his office lobby. "Your career is an elevator. You get in, you keep your head down, you press the button, and you go up. You don't make noise. You don't ask stupid questions. You especially don't use the fire escape." He'd smiled then, a thin, satisfied smile. "The fire escape is for failures." I was an analyst in a glass tower, instructed not to analyze, only to ascend. And then there was Vivian Cross. In the courtroom, my father's lawyer was frantically whispering to him, but his eyes were now locked on me. The ice-chip gaze had melted, replaced by a baffled, horrified betrayal. He hadn't just underestimated me. He had forgotten I existed as anything other than a line item. Vivian Cross was the vice president of strategic ventures, and for the past 18 months, my father's new partner to the press. She was brilliant. She was the photogenic, charming face of C&B's human-centric turn. She gave interviews in soft cashmere sweaters, her blonde hair pulled back in an artful, effortless knot. She spoke about synergy and community-facing investment, and smiled a gentle, disarming smile. Behind the scenes, she was the architect. She structured the deals. She handled the sensitive acquisitions. She was the one who brought in the glossy, multi-million-dollar contracts for satellite projects, small, agile tech providers that C&B would absorb. I wasn't supposed to be looking at those projects. I was a junior analyst, assigned to monitoring commodity price fluctuations in our core manufacturing supply chain. But the folders were all on the same server, and I was curious. The minor adjustments started as a flicker, a data point that didn't reconcile. A vendor for Project Hatch, one of Vivian's satellites, had submitted 2 invoices in the same month, one for $145,000, the other, 2 weeks later, for $145,000. Identical line items, identical project codes, identical amounts, but the invoice numbers were sequential, and the payment routing codes were different. One went to a registered LLC in Delaware, the other went to a numbered account at a different bank, coded as a service fee. A simple duplicate, a clerical error. I flagged it. My supervisor, a timid man named Peters, told me to unflag it. "That's a VP-level project. Rain," he'd said, not meeting my eye. "It's on a different reconciliation schedule. Just leave it. It's not our lane." So I left it. But I didn't forget it. A week later, I saw another one, a different project, same vendor, same clerical error. This was when the divorce was starting. My mother, who had hosted my father's dinner parties, raised his children, and served as the unpaid, uncredited consultant on his image for 30 years, was being pushed out. He'd had her served with papers at my grandmother's funeral. When she'd, quite reasonably, asked for a full accounting of marital assets, the narrative machine whirred to life. Suddenly, my quiet, gardening-obsessed mother was a greedy ex-wife in the local gossip columns. Sources close to the family whispered that she was unstable and looking for a windfall. It was Vivian's language, soft, dismissive, and lethal. It was the same tone she used in board meetings to kill a project she didn't like. And all the while, the Bryn Mawr Financial Journal was fawning. They ran a cover story on my father, Graham Mercer, the man who engineered integrity. They called him a beacon of corporate governance and a symbol of market discipline. I read the article on my lunch break, a bitter, acidic taste in my mouth. I looked at the glossy photo of him, standing in front of the glass wall of his office, looking out over the city like a king. I didn't go back to my desk. I went to the 12th floor. The server room was my secret place. It was always cold, kept at a steady 65 degrees, and the noise was constant. A loud, rushing whoosh from the HVAC and the high-pitched electronic hum of the server racks. It sounded like the building was hyperventilating, a constant, mechanical gasp. I sat on a metal stool in the aisle between Data Core Alpha and Data Core Beta. No one ever came in here except the IT techs, and they all worked nights. In the sterile, cold air, I opened my laptop and plugged directly into a maintenance port. I wasn't a hacker. I was just an analyst using the credentials I'd been given. But now, I was using them to look at the fire escape. I cross-referenced the duplicate invoice vendor, the LLC, VCS Hatchery LLC. The address was a P.O. box in Wilmington. The registration agent was a generic legal service, but the secondary routing bank, that account number. I ran a search on our internal payment logs. That account number had appeared before, not for VCS Hatchery, but for a list of executive travel and entertainment expenses. Expenses submitted by and approved for Vivian Cross. It wasn't just a duplicate payment, it was a kickback, a loop. Money was being siphoned from the satellite project budget, paid to a shell vendor, and then kicked back into a personal slush fund, disguised as T&E, and the amounts weren't small. I was looking at millions, spread over 2 years, all from projects Vivian personally oversaw, projects my father signed off on. I felt cold, but it wasn't from the air conditioning. I was looking at the guts of the lie. Integrity engineered. They weren't just polishing the glass. They were building a house of mirrors. I must have been too obvious. Maybe I asked Peters one too many hypothetical questions. Maybe my search history was flagged. A few days later, Vivian Cross appeared at my desk. She didn't summon me. She just materialized, a silent, fragrant presence in my peripheral vision. She was wearing a cream-colored silk dress, and she smiled at me. It was the same gentle smile she gave the press. "Rain, dear, how are you settling in?" "I'm fine, Ms. Cross, thank you." She leaned against the partition of my cubicle, a casual, friendly posture. "I heard you were taking an interest in the satellite ventures. It's complex stuff, far above your pay grade. Honestly," she laughed, a light tinkling sound. "It's wonderful to be ambitious, but we need you focused on your own metrics, don't we?" I kept my face neutral. I just saw a few invoice queries in the system and was trying to reconcile them against the primary supply chain. "Ah." Her smile tightened. Just a fraction. "The queries." She tilted her head, her expression one of kind, maternal concern. "You know, Rain, I see a lot of potential in you. You have your father's analytical mind, but you need his pragmatism." She picked up a pen from my desk, idly turning it over in her perfectly manicured fingers. "A piece of advice, from one woman to another in this business." Her voice dropped to a confidential, friendly whisper. "Don't be curious. Curiosity is for academics. In this building, it's just noise." She placed the pen down, aligning it perfectly with the edge of my keyboard. "Curiosity burns futures, Rain. It's a fire escape. And you know what your father says about those?" She smiled, a final, brilliant flash of white teeth, and glided away, leaving the scent of expensive perfume and a chill that sank right into my bones. That was the moment. That was the choice. The elevator or the fire escape. I looked at the pen she had aligned. A perfect straight line. A warning. So I learned to be silent. I became the invisible analyst my father wanted. I did my work. I focused on my metrics. I never asked another question. I never flagged another file. And in the evenings, in my small apartment, I started a new project on a new laptop with a secured connection. I learned to be quiet, so quiet that I could finally hear everything. I could hear the silent, steady, relentless drip of the money as it flowed, not through the cracks, but through the channels they had engineered right into the foundation of the glass house. In the courtroom, Judge Keats was looking at my father. "Mr. Mercer," she repeated, her voice like ice. "Your daughter has been extremely thorough." My father's gaze finally tore away from me and snapped to the judge. He saw the file in her hand. He saw the flowchart on top. He saw the name VCS Hatchery LLC at the center of the web. He thought I was on the elevator, going up. He never, ever dreamed I'd be in the server room, taking pictures of the basement. 3:17 a.m. The numbers on the digital clock glowed a flat, unforgiving red. My apartment was small, a rental box on the third floor of a repurposed warehouse overlooking the Bryn Mawr docks. The only sounds were the persistent click-clack of my keyboard and the distant, mournful groan of a container ship being unloaded under harsh sodium lights. The air smelled of stale coffee, old paper, and the sharp, briny tang of the low-tide harbor. Next to my keyboard, I had placed a small, 3-minute hourglass. It wasn't for timing. It was a visual reminder of pressure, of sand slipping through a bottleneck. Every time I felt my focus drift, I would watch the fine white sand fall, and it would bring me back. Click, clack, click. This was not a letter. It was a final report. It was an audit of a life, of a corporation, of a marriage. I was writing to Judge Miriam Keats. "Your Honor, I am submitting this letter and the attached appendices in reference to Case Hollis v. Mercer. I do so not as a party to the divorce, but as an employee of Calder & Bray Systems with direct, verifiable knowledge of financial malfeasance that materially impacts the assets under dispute." My tone was cold, procedural. I was an analyst, and this was my analysis. The body of the letter was a timeline. It was the skeleton key to the entire fraud. 8:14 p.m., May 10. Graham Mercer and Vivian Cross meet off-site with contractor Alpha Build. See Appendix C, Line 1, Rebate Confirmation. 9:02 a.m., May 12. First wire transfer to VCES Hatchery LLC, coded as Project Reconciliation. See Appendix A, Tab 1, Transaction ID 8891A, 4:30 p.m., May 14. Vivian Cross authorizes duplicate invoice payment for Project Hatch services. See Appendix A, Tab 2, Transaction ID 9022B. I cross-referenced every voucher number with my father's travel schedule. I annotated every transfer with its corresponding fraudulent expense report. I built the case piece by piece, link by link, until the chain was visible, solid, and unbreakable. The appendices were the weapon itself. Appendix A was the core. It was titled, Ledger Photo to CSV Conversion Key. I had spent 3 nights in the server room on the 12th floor. Long after the night shift techs had made their rounds, I'd used my phone, muffled in my hand, to photograph the blurry, scanned-in images of the secondary ledgers, the shadow books they thought were safely buried in an archived partition. The photos alone were damning, but hard to read, hard to search. An analyst doesn't present a pile of blurry photos. An analyst presents data. So, at my kitchen table, I had manually transcribed every line item from those JPEGs into a master CSV file. The file I was attaching was the lookup table, the Rosetta Stone. Column A, original JPEG file name. Column B, date of entry. Column C, amount. Column D, routing code. Column E, authorizing signature code. And at the top of that spreadsheet, in a locked cell, was the final, beautiful, technical proof. The SHA-256 hash. I had run a hash function on the server's original image files. My CSV file, when run through the same function, would prove that my transcription was a perfect, unaltered digital match to the files they now thought were safely hidden. It proved I hadn't faked it. I had just decoded it. But the letter didn't start with the numbers. It started with the why. The first narrative paragraph, right after the introduction, was about my mother. The plaintiff, Helen Mercer, was presented with a preliminary settlement offer on August 4th. This offer was presented not by counsel, but by the defendant himself. This offer, which I have seen, required her to forfeit all claims to 50% of known shared assets, including her stake in the C&B stock options granted during the marital period. I was present when my father told her that if she did not sign, he would immediately have her removed from the corporate health insurance plan. I typed the specific, cruel leverage. This includes, he stated, the coverage for your rheumatoid arthritis specialist and the biologic infusions you receive. This was not an allegation. It was a statement of fact. It was the threat that had pushed my mother to the edge, and it was the threat that had pushed me to the 12th floor. Appendix B was about intent. It was a single, perfect screenshot from the internal Slack, a private channel named Project Hatch Admin that I shouldn't have been able to see. But a server-wide permissions audit 6 months ago had briefly given all risk analysts read-only access to everything. I was the only one who seemed to have noticed, and I had taken screenshots. The screenshot showed a conversation between Vivian Cross and the Director of Finance. Vivian Cross, 10:22 a.m. The auditors are sniffing around the Hatch budget. We need to move the overage. Finance Director, 10:23 a.m. Where? The VCS account is too hot right now. Vivian Cross, 10:23 a.m. We'll flip the costs, reroute it as a charitable donation to the Calder Community Fund, bury it in the Q4 philanthropy numbers. I'll handle the paperwork. The Calder Community Fund, the corporate charity my father had been praised for founding, they were using it as a washing machine. Appendix C was the jackpot. It was the human error. It was the email Vivian Cross had sent by mistake. It had arrived in my inbox 2 months ago. Subject line, contractor schedules. It was clearly meant for my father. Graham Mercer. Not me. Rain Mercer. A simple, fatal autocomplete error. She had realized her mistake and recalled the message 30 seconds later, but I was faster. I had already saved the attachment and the email itself as an MSG file. The attachment was an Excel spreadsheet. Contractor Rebate Schedule Q3, XLSX. It wasn't a rebate schedule, it was a kickback ledger. It listed 3 of C&B's largest vendors. Next to their names were percentages, 5%, 7%, 3%, and next to those percentages were dollar amounts, which matched, to the penny, the overage invoices I'd found in Appendix A, and at the bottom of the spreadsheet, a final tally, with a handwritten scanned note from Vivian on the proposed distribution between GM, VC, and Hatchery Holding. She had, in a single careless click, emailed me a confession. I compiled all of it, the letter, the appendices, the spreadsheets, but this was just the summary. This was the trail of breadcrumbs for the judge. The real feast was somewhere else. My final act on the keyboard was to insert a QR code into the footer of the letter. Your Honor, for a full, unredacted, and searchable archive of all supporting data, including server logs, original email files with metadata, full financial records from the accessed partitions, and a complete timeline of my data access, please use the provided secure portal. This QR code links to a Level 4 encrypted data room. Access is restricted to IP addresses originating from the Hollis County Courthouse and the Regional Office of the Securities and Exchange Commission. The data room was the kill shot. It wasn't just my analysis. It was the entire raw database I had quietly, meticulously exfiltrated over 6 months. It proved every word. And the QR code. It was just so modern, so simple. A little black and white square that was, in reality, a digital bomb. I finished the letter. The sand in the hourglass had run out. I understand the legal and personal ramifications of this submission. I submit it because the actions detailed herein are not just a marital dispute. They constitute actionable corporate fraud. I am, by birth, the defendant's daughter, but I am, by employment and citizenship, an individual with a duty to report. I hit print. The cheap inkjet printer in my living room whined to life, spitting out the 22 pages of the packet. I picked up a pen, a simple, black ballpoint. I signed my name at the bottom of the letter. Rain Mercer. My hand, which had been so steady on the keyboard, so precise in its data entry, shook, just a little, a tiny human tremor that jagged the tail of the R. The ink was blue-black on the white paper. It was done. I slid the pages into a thick 9x12 manila envelope. I sealed the flap. I wrote Judge Miriam Keats, Eyes Only, Hollis v. Mercer on the front. I put on my coat. It was 4:02 a.m. The city was in its deepest moment of sleep. I walked out of my building. The drizzle was cold, fine as mist, and it beaded on the shoulders of my jacket. The streetlights cast greasy, yellow circles on the wet cobblestones. I walked the 2 blocks to the corner of Harbor Street and 4th. The smell of rust from the dockyard railings was thick in the damp air. It smelled like old blood. There it was, the blue, metal, unfeeling mouth of the Federal Express drop box. It was bolted to the concrete, permanent, official. I stood in front of it for a full minute, the packet heavy in my hand. This was the fire escape. This was the leap. Once the envelope slid through that slot, there was no recall, no apology, no going back to the elevator. I thought of my mother's trembling hand. I thought of my father's roar of contempt. I thought of Vivian's warning. Curiosity burns futures. Let it burn, I thought. I pushed the heavy metal door. The hinges groaned in the quiet. I slid the packet in. Clang. It was a dull, metallic, final sound, the sound of a door locking. I turned away from the box and started walking back to my apartment. The cold rain on my face. The sky in the east was just beginning to bruise with a faint, sick purple light. There was no turning back. The silence in the courtroom was no longer just quiet. It was a vacuum, sucking all the air and sound out of the room. My father's lawyer, the shark in the expensive suit, was on her feet, her mouth open. But Judge Keats wasn't looking at her. She wasn't looking at any of them. She was looking at the papers. The packet lay open on her bench. She had moved past the flow chart, the document that had drawn her first, incredulous laugh. She had turned the page on the Slack screenshot, her eyebrow raising a millimeter. She had bypassed the lookup key, the technical heart of the data. Her eyes were fixed on Appendix D. It was a scanned document, a copy of a copy, grainy and slightly skewed, the kind of file that gets buried in a server subdirectory labeled Archive Final Do Not Delete. It was the minutes from a quarterly vendor review meeting. My father, Graham Mercer, had run these meetings personally. They were, in his words, where he kept his boot on the throat of the supply chain. Judge Keats's gaze scanned the page. It was dry, full of procedural jargon and bullet points. Then she stopped. Her eyes tracked to the bottom of the 3rd page, to the signature block. She looked at my father. He was still standing, his posture rigid, radiating a furious, baffled energy. He looked like a bull that couldn't find the matador. Miss Mercer, the judge said, her voice deceptively light. You are, of course, the CEO of Calder & Bray. You sign hundreds of documents a week, I'm sure. Of course, his lawyer snapped, finding her voice. Your Honor, this is irrelevant. This is a fishing expedition. Oh, I think we found the fish. Counsel. Judge Keats replied, not unkindly. She tapped the paper. This is Appendix D, minutes from a vendor review, dated July 19th. It lists the approval of several new contractors for Project Hatch. She paused, and the vacuum in the room seemed to intensify. I could feel my own pulse, a slow, heavy thud, thud, thud against my ribs. Then, Judge Keats did it again. It wasn't the first bark of surprise. This was different. It was a short, sharp, almost silent exhalation of breath through her nose, a laugh of pure, unadulterated, legal irony, a sound that said, "You cannot be this stupid." She put her reading glasses back on, as if to confirm what she was seeing. Mr. Mercer, page 4 of this document is the mandatory Conflict of Interest Declaration Addendum, and here, clear as day, is your signature. She held the paper up just slightly. You have signed, with your own pen, that you have no personal, professional, or financial conflict with any of the vendors approved on page 3. She let the paper drop. The vendor at the top of that list, she said, her voice now flat and cold as steel, is Alpha Build Contracting, which, according to your daughter's flowchart in Appendix A, is the primary pass-through for payments to VCS Hatchery LLC, a holding company registered to Vivian Cross. A sound rippled through the courtroom. It wasn't a gasp. It was a sharp, collective intake of breath, like a wave hitting a rock wall and being sucked back out to sea. Shh! The court reporter, who had been typing with a rhythmic, detached speed, stopped. Her hands froze over the keys. My father's face, which had been waxy pale, was suddenly, terrifyingly, crimson again. The blood had rushed back in a tidal wave of pure, cornered rage. Forgery! The word exploded from him, echoing off the high, plaster ceiling. He jabbed a finger, not at the judge, but at me, at the back of the room. She faked it! That is a forgery! It's not my signature! She's a tech analyst! She's in the system! She fabricated that document! She faked the signature! His lawyer was trying to grab his arm. Graham, stop. It's a lie, he roared. Judge Keats did not flinch. She did not raise her voice. She did not pick up her gavel. She simply looked down at the letter in front of her. My letter. Mr. Mercer, she said, her voice cutting through his roar like a scalpel through canvas. Your daughter, the unstable girl, who knows nothing, seems to have anticipated that accusation. She read directly from my submission. Per the attached affidavit from the analyst, the document, Minutes Q2, Vendor Final, PDF, was not altered. It was accessed and copied from the C&B primary archive server. The SHA 256 hash of the submitted file is an exact match for the source file on the server, which can be verified by a third-party forensic auditor. She looked up, her eyes locking on my father's. She included the hash string, Mr. Mercer, and the server metadata, which, I might add, shows the file was last modified and locked by your own IT department on July 20th, time-stamped at 23:41. She let the silence stretch, thick and toxic. The file wasn't altered, sir. It was just read. My father's mouth opened and closed. No sound came out. He had built his empire on stock prices, on projections, on narratives. He had no defense against a string of hexadecimal code. He had no answer for a hash. Bang! The gavel cracked against the wooden block, a sharp, violent sound that made everyone in the room jump. This court is in recess, Judge Keats announced, her voice booming with sudden, absolute authority. The immediate matter of this divorce proceeding is suspended. She was on her feet, her robe settling around her. I am, effective immediately, granting the plaintiff's emergency motion for a temporary restraining order to preserve all marital and community assets. This order freezes all accounts, personal and corporate, listed in the appendices of this letter. There will be no transfer of funds, no liquidation of stock, no alteration of directorships at Calder and Bray Systems or any of its listed subsidiaries, including VCS Hatchery, pending a full emergency review. She was locking him down. She was freezing the entire company based on my letter. The judge turned to leave, her clerk gathering the packet. This is a travesty, my father's lawyer shouted. We will appeal. You do that, counsel, Judge Keats said over her shoulder, but you'll do it after my clerk forwards this entire packet to the white-collar division of the district attorney's office and the regional director of the SEC. She disappeared through the side door. My father stood frozen for a beat, his entire body thrumming like a high-voltage wire. Then, in a blind, animalistic rage, he forgot where he was. He turned. He lunged, not at me, but toward my mother's table. "You," he growled, his voice a low, terrifying rasp. You did this. You bitch." My mother flinched violently, her chair scraping backward as she recoiled. Her lawyer threw up an arm. But he never made it. A court officer, a large, impassive man who had been a piece of the wall for the entire hearing, moved with a speed that was shocking. He didn't touch my father. He didn't have to. He simply stepped between the tables. A solid, blue-uniformed wall. "Mr. Mercer," the officer said, his voice a calm, deep monotone. "Sit down, now." My father stopped, his chest heaving. He looked at the officer, then at his lawyer, who was pulling on his sleeve, her face pale with panic. The rage was still there, but the realization of where he was and what he had just done was dawning. He had just tried to charge his wife in a federal courtroom, in front of a court officer, after being accused of fraud. I looked past the tableau, past the officer's broad back, past my father's trembling, bespoke suited shoulders. I looked at my mother. She was crying. The tears were silent, rolling steadily down her face, dripping from her chin onto the beige wool of her sweater. But she wasn't hiding. She wasn't hunched. Her head was up. She met my gaze. Her eyes were red and swimming, but behind the tears, her spine was made of iron. I had seen her cry 1,000 times from sadness, from frustration, from being worn down. This was not that. This was the crying of a dam that had finally broken. It was the crying of release. She looked at me, and in that gaze, I saw 30 years of being silenced, and I saw the exact moment that silence ended. She gave me a single, jerky, terrified nod. "Thank you." I felt another pair of eyes, a different kind of stare. Hot, acidic. I turned my head. The gallery was in chaos. The 2 reporters in the back were already on their phones, slipping out the door. The law students were whispering, their faces lit with the thrill of real-world drama. And in the second row, half hidden by a gray marble pillar, sat Vivian Cross. She wasn't on the docket. She wasn't a party to the divorce. She was just there, an observer. She had come. I realized with a cold sickness to watch my mother be dismantled, to watch her victory be formalized. She was wearing a sharp teal-colored dress, her blonde hair in its signature, effortless knot. The gentle cashmere and community smile was gone. Her face was a mask of chalk white, controlled fury. Her lips were a thin, bloodless line. She was staring at me, and her gaze was not one of confusion or anger. It was a look of pure, unadulterated hatred, a look that said, "You were an insect. You were noise." Her hand was clamped around her black smartphone. She wasn't just holding it, she was crushing it, her knuckles white, as if she was imagining it was my throat. We stared at each other for a long, silent, unbroken 5 seconds. The noise of the courtroom, the lawyers, the clerk, the officer, faded away. It was just the 2 of us. The woman who had told me curiosity burns futures, and the girl who had just lit the match. I didn't smile. I didn't look away. I didn't react at all. I just held her gaze. I let her see that I saw her. I let her see that I wasn't scared. I wasn't anything. I was just a fact. She broke first. She looked down, her thumb moving frantically on her screen, and then she stood, pulling her jacket straight, and swept out of the courtroom, a picture of icy, frantic grace. The tension, which had been a steel band around my chest, finally snapped. I let out a breath I hadn't even known I was holding. It came out in a long, shuddering sigh that was almost silent. The courtroom was clearing out. My mother was being led gently out a side door by her lawyer. My father was sitting at his table, head in his hands, as his lawyer argued with the clerk. It was over, for now. I stood there, alone in the back row. My hands, I realized, were shaking, but my chest felt quiet. In the ringing silence of my own head, the only sound I could hear was the phantom echo of Judge Keats's laugh, that dry, sharp bark. It was the sound of a hammer hitting a nail. It was the sound of the first crack in a 17-story glass wall. It was not a sound of humor. It was the sound of a mechanism engaging, a deep, heavy, righteous drumbeat that was just beginning to pick up its rhythm, and it was thrumming in my chest, steady and strong. The morning after the hearing, I arrived at 8:05 a.m. It was a Tuesday. The sky was a brilliant, clinical blue, and the sun striking the 17-story glass facade of the Calder and Bray Tower made it look like a pillar of white fire. Business as usual. I walked up to the sleek, aluminum and glass turnstiles in the lobby. I placed my employee ID card on the sensor. Beep! A small red X flashed on the screen. Access denied. I tried again. Beep, access denied. Frank, the morning shift security guard who had waved me through for 3 years, looked at his own screen. His face was pale and tight. He wouldn't meet my eyes. Ms. Mercer? Your cards. It's showing inactive. I'm sorry. I didn't argue. I didn't act surprised. I know, Frank. It's okay. I walked over to the guest reception desk, my footsteps echoing on the black marble. The receptionist, a new hire I didn't recognize, looked up with a strained, professional smile. Good morning. How can I help you? Rain Mercer, I said. I'm an employee. My card seems to be deactivated. The smile froze. Her eyes widened, just for a second. She knew the name. The entire building knew the name. Oh, one moment, she typed frantically. Yes, I'm not seeing you as active. Do you have a meeting scheduled? I do, I said, my voice pleasant and flat. With the entire executive team. They're expecting me. She fumbled, her hands shaking slightly. She finally printed a flimsy paper badge, the kind with a sticky back that never stays on. It said, Visitor. I peeled the back off and stuck it to my blazer. I was no longer an analyst. I was a guest in my own office. I walked through the visitor turnstile, the gate sliding open with a soft, permissive whoosh. I rode the guest elevator, the one with the bland, generic music. My phone was already buzzing. I hadn't been kicked out of the internal messaging system. Not yet. They were clumsy. They had cut off my physical access, but not my digital. The main general chatter channel was a wildfire of suppressed panic. User 4409. Sales. Did anyone see the Bryn Mawr Journal alert? CNB stock halted pending internal investigation. User 218E. Marketing. My brother-in-law at Morgan Stanley said, trading is frozen. Totally frozen. User 7712. Logistics. What's going on? Is this about the divorce? Graham's divorce? User 3030. IT. Heard from a friend in legal. It's not just the divorce. It's the SEC. Someone said the SEC is asking questions. My own team channel, Risk Analysis, was a graveyard. Dead silent. They knew. They knew I was the one who had walked into the courthouse. They knew the unstable girl who knew nothing was one of them. Ding. A new email appeared, addressed to all staff. Subject, urgent. Mandatory data preservation notice. From CNB Legal Department. Effective immediately. All employees are directed to preserve all electronic and physical documents, emails, messages, notes, and data logs related to all CNB projects, vendor accounts, and executive travel. No data is to be deleted, altered, or moved. All system logs are now frozen pending an internal and external audit. I smiled. It was the perfect, panicked, corporate CYA. They were trying to look compliant. But in doing so, they had just legally forbidden themselves from deleting the evidence. They had put themselves in their own cage. I got off on the 14th floor, my floor. The sound was wrong. The normal sound of the 14th floor was a low, productive hum, the tapping of keyboards, the quiet murmur of conference calls, the rattle of the coffee machine. Today, the sound was silence, a thick, heavy, anxious silence. People were at their desks, but no one was working. They were in small, frozen clusters, whispering. When I stepped out of the elevator lobby, the whispering stopped, instantly. As I walked toward my cubicle, the clusters broke apart. People scattered, heads down, suddenly fascinated by their shoes, their keyboards, the ceiling tiles. Not a single person would meet my eye. I was no longer Rain Mercer. I was a ghost. I was a federal witness. I was the person who had pulled the pin on the grenade. They looked at me like I was the police, like my very presence could incriminate them. Then I saw her. Vivian Cross. She was supposed to be on the 16th floor, the executive floor, but she was here, on my floor, standing by the office of the chief financial officer, a nervous man named Harris. She had him cornered, her back to the walkway. She was hissing, her voice a low, furious vibration. I slowed my pace, pulling my phone out as if to check a message. My other hand slipped into my jacket pocket. My fingers found the pen. It looked like a standard, expensive rollerball. It was a broadcast-quality audio recorder. I'd been carrying it for 4 months. I clicked the top, a tiny metallic snick. Don't care what the legal email said. Vivian was spitting, her voice stripped of all its cashmere and community softness. It was pure, distilled venom. Their preservation notice is for the idiots in sales. The drafts of the Q4 strategic plan are not official documents. They are speculative notes. They don't exist yet. Harris, the CFO, was literally sweating. I could see a dark patch on the collar of his pale blue shirt. Vivian, the system logs are frozen, legal said. I don't care about the logs. I care about the files, she snarled. That's where all the modeling for the hatch transfer is. The projections, the payout schedule. It's on the Sandbox server. I want you to go to the terminal, you, personally, and delete the drafts. Wipe the entire Sandbox. Wipe it? That's active destruction of evidence. Vivian, they'll know. They'll know we're cleaning up speculative data before the audit. It's housekeeping. Do it, now, and then bleach the drive. I walked past them, my head down, not giving them a second glance, as if I was just heading to the restroom. As I rounded the corner, I clicked the pen again. I had it, a direct verbal order to destroy evidence, obstruction of justice. I didn't go to my desk. I didn't go to the restroom. I went to the stairwell, my visitor badge flapping, and walked down to the 12th floor, to the server room. The cold air hit me, along with the constant, high-pitched whine of the fans. He was waiting for me. Malik. Malik was a senior systems engineer, one of the few people in the building who saw the architecture for what it was, a beautiful, logical puzzle. He didn't care about the stock price, but he despised sloppy work and moral corruption. He'd helped me map the server permissions months ago, thinking it was a theoretical risk project. When he saw the news this morning, he knew. You really did it, he whispered, not turning from a rack of blinking green lights. His face was pale. Not yet, I said. They're trying to delete the Sandbox server. Vivian just ordered Harris to wipe it. A thin, grim smile touched Malik's lips. Let them try. I locked the root access an hour ago, pushed a fake kernel panic error to the whole array. They think the system is frozen for audit because of the legal email. No, it's frozen because I unplugged it. My stomach clenched. You? They're not the only ones who can engineer integrity, he said, tapping the server rack. They're panicking. Rain. And they're stupid. They're still trying to push the transfer through. He handed me a folded piece of paper from his back pocket. I unfolded it. It was a screenshot from the internal calendar system. A meeting invite, created 20 minutes ago. Meeting. Project Hatch. Final module transfer. Urgent. Attendees. Graham Mercer, Vivian Cross, Harris, CFO, a name I didn't recognize, a lawyer from their outside counsel. Time, tonight, 9:00 p.m. Look at the location, Malik said. It wasn't a conference room. It was an address, the off-site disaster recovery center, a concrete bunker in the suburbs. They're going to try to move the payment module, I whispered, the pieces clicking into place. The judge's order. It's a data transfer, Malik said, his voice low. They're going to try to physically port the entire hatchery account and payment system to the shell company's servers in the Caymans. They think if they can get the data off-site, they can claim it was a pre-existing contractual obligation, outside the judge's jurisdiction. They're trying to move the whole bank. Rain, tonight. They're betting the data will be gone before the SEC can even serve a warrant. They're betting on the legal fight, he corrected, after the evidence has vanished. I looked at the screenshot. 9:00 p.m. Thank you. Malik, you need to be clean. Go. I was never here, he said, and disappeared into the cold, loud aisle between the racks. I went to a small, windowless utility closet on the 11th floor. I sat on an overturned bucket of joint compound. I took out my personal, air-gapped laptop and tethered it to my phone's hotspot. I logged into the secure data room, the one Judge Keats had the QR code for. I created a new folder, timestamp today. I uploaded the audio file from my pen. Voice Vivian CFO Destruction of Evidence, MP3. I uploaded the screenshot from Malik. Calendar invite hatch transfer, 9 p.m., JPG. I uploaded a new text file. Affidavit attempt to circumvent court order, text. In it, I detailed, with cold precision, the plan to move the module at 9 p.m. Then, I armed the final phase of my plan. I had built a dead man's switch into the data room's code. It was a simple script. Tied to the C&B servers, I programmed the trigger. If the C&B system logs showed a force delete command on the sandbox server, if the system logs showed my employee credentials being purged, if the system logs showed a data packet transfer from the hatch module to any external IP address, the script would execute. The Level 4 encryption on the data room would instantly dissolve. The judicial eyes-only restriction would vaporize. An automated email, containing the full unsecured link to the data room and the master decryption key, would be sent to the public tip lines of the SEC, the DOJ, the Wall Street Journal, and every major financial news outlet on my pre-compiled list. They thought they could erase their crimes. But if they so much as touched the delete key, they would be the ones to hit publish. I packed my laptop. I walked out of the closet. I didn't take the elevator. I took the fire stairs, all 14 flights down, the concrete steps ringing under my feet. I emerged in the grand lobby. It was 10:42 a.m. The atrium was silent, a marble tomb. The massive, wall-mounted stock ticker, usually a river of green and white, was now a stagnant bar of red dashes. Trading halted. I stopped in the middle of the floor. I looked up at the 40-foot LED wall behind the reception desk. It was still running its elegant blue and white loop. The C&B logo dissolved, and the words slid into place, crisp and serene. Integrity engineered. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it. I took out my phone. I took a clear, high-resolution picture, the motto, hanging in the air, with the blood-red, trading halted ticker reflected in the polished marble floor beneath it. I attached the image to the 9 p.m. affidavit in the data room, a perfect cover photo. I walked to the revolving glass doors, pulling the sticky visitor badge from my jacket. I dropped it into a silver trash receptacle on my way out. The city was bright and loud. I walked 2 blocks to a cafe, bought a large black coffee, and sat at an outdoor table. I faced the tower. I could see the 17th floor windows of my father's office, a dark, unreadable rectangle against the blue sky. I did not sleep last night. I would not sleep tonight. There were no more dreams, no more idle curiosity. There was only 9:00 p.m. There was only the work left to do. The emergency meeting of the Calder and Bray Board of Directors was convened at 2:00 p.m. It was held in the Northlight Conference Room on the 17th floor. The room was a monument to corporate opacity. 3 walls were smoked glass. Looking out over the city, the 4th wall, the one facing the internal corridor, was floor-to-ceiling frosted glass, blurring the figures inside into anonymous, powerful shadows. The table was a single, 30-foot slab of polished black walnut, so dark and reflective it looked like a strip of standing water. The men and women around it were the real power in Bryn Mawr. Banking scions, old money industrialists, a former senator. They were the independent directors, and they were not happy. They were sharks who had been swimming in calm waters, and my father had just chummed that water with his own blood. My father, Graham Mercer, sat at the head of the table. He was a portrait of command. His dark suit was immaculate. His silver-gray hair was perfect. He looked severe, concerned, and, above all, in control. It was a masterful performance. At the 80-inch 4K monitor, Vivian Cross was running the slideshow. She, too, was a picture of poise. She wore a high-collared, severe black dress. Her voice was calm, modulated, and full of reasonable concern. The slide on the screen read, "Crisis Management, a coordinated external attack." "The events of the past 24 hours have been shocking," Vivian said, her hands clasped lightly in front of her. "We are facing a two-pronged assault. The first is a personal, vindictive action from Mr. Mercer's estranged wife, which we were prepared to handle. The second, and more damaging, is a malicious internal data theft." She clicked to the next slide. It showed a generic, shadowy silhouette of a person at a computer. Internal threat, the disgruntled employee. It appears a junior-level employee. Rain Mercer, Mr. Mercer's own daughter, sadly, has allowed this personal family dispute to cloud her judgment. She has stolen proprietary, non-contextualized data and presented it to the court in a fallacious, highly inflammatory manner. This is the sole reason for the market's overreaction. This is not a failure of governance. This is a family matter, weaponized. She was brilliant. She was painting me as an emotional, unstable girl. She was containing the problem, reframing it as a domestic spat that had spilled over. My father nodded, his face a mask of pained, paternal gravitas. "It is a tragedy, Arthur. My daughter is unwell. I've been trying to get her help. This is her lashing out. The company is sound. Our integrity is sound." Arthur Hayes, the former senator and the board's lead independent director, looked at his watch. He was a man in his 70s, with a face like carved granite. He was the only one in the room my father truly feared. "Thank you for that assessment, Vivian," Hayes said, his voice a dry, gravelly rumble. "But your presentation is, I see, missing one agenda item." Vivian paused. "Sir?" "Agenda item 4B, Hayes said, looking at a paper in front of him. "Risk assessment, internal controls and judicial compliance, submitted by me." My father's eyes narrowed. "Arthur, we can table that. This is a media crisis." "No, I don't think we can," Hayes said. "The media crisis is a symptom. I'd like to hear about the disease. Please, let her in." He nodded to the frosted glass door. The door opened. I walked in. The silence that fell was absolute. It was not just quiet. It was a cessation of all molecular activity. I saw 8 of the most powerful people in the city physically recoil. I saw Vivian Cross's hand, the one holding the remote, clenched so hard her knuckles went white. My father shot to his feet. "What is the meaning of this? Get her out of here! Security!" "She is here at my invitation." "Graham," Hayes said, his voice level and cold. "She is a named witness in a federal court order that has frozen our assets. She is, as of this morning, the single greatest risk to this company's survival. I want to hear from the risk analyst herself. Sit down." My father didn't sit. He remained standing, vibrating with a rage so profound it made the air around him shimmer. I walked to the head of the table, my footsteps silent on the thick wool carpet. I was carrying my personal laptop. I did not look at my father. I did not look at Vivian. I looked at the board. "Ms. Cross, if you please," I said. She was frozen, staring at me with a hatred that was physical, a heat I could feel on my skin. "The monitor," I said. She stared. Arthur, I said, turning to Hayes. Vivian, Hayes rumbled. Step away from the monitor. Let the young woman speak. Like a snake uncoiling, Vivian moved, her face a mask of placid fury. She went to stand by the wall, by my father's chair. I unplugged her laptop and plugged in my own. Her slide, the disgruntled employee, vanished. My screen mirrored. It was not a PowerPoint. It was the data room. It was the flowchart, the spiderweb of deceit, the map of the theft. This, I said, my voice clear and cold in the sterile room, is not a family dispute. This is a forensic audit. I pointed to the central node. Project Hatch, approved by this board as a $40 million R&D accelerator. As you can see, $1.8 million was diverted here to a vendor called AlphaBuild, and here, $1.5 million to a vendor called Griffin Logistics. Both are shell corporations. I clicked. Those shells then made identical consulting fee payments, here and here, to this entity, VCS Hatchery LLC. The entity Judge Keats froze yesterday. The entity registered to Vivian Cross. A low murmur went around the table. This is baseless, my father roared. This is the fantasy I told you about. I clicked again. A new set of data appeared, overlaid on the flowchart. This is not a fantasy, Mr. Mercer. This is your travel schedule. I pointed. Here, May 10th, a payment of $800,000 to VCS Hatchery, and here, a flight manifest for the company jet to Zurich, filed by Graham Mercer, and here, an expense report from Vivian Cross, for the same dates, for client entertainment at a restaurant 2 blocks from the Swiss bank that holds the VCS account. I clicked again. July 19th, the AlphaBuild vendor payment of $1.5 million, and here, a wire transfer from the VCS Hatchery account for a $1.5 million down payment on a penthouse in this city, a property for which the deed is held in a blind trust, a trust for which the sole beneficiary is Graham Mercer. The room was silent. The board members were looking at the screen, then at my father, then at the screen. They were watching the media problem evaporate, replaced by the hard, cold reality of federal-level fraud. Ms. Mercer, Arthur Hayes said, his voice quiet. How did you obtain this data? The court filing was a summary. This is the raw data from your own servers, I said. I am, as Ms. Cross pointed out, a junior-level risk analyst. My credentials gave me read-only access to the archive partitions. I was, as my father noted, unwell, if by unwell you mean curious. I looked at the board. I gathered it all using my valid access, and as of yesterday's preservation order, this is all legally protected evidence. I'm not a disgruntled employee. Mr. Hayes, I'm the designated custodian of the truth. Vivian Cross laughed. It was a thin, brittle, terrible sound, like glass breaking. She stepped away from the wall. Commendable, Rain, truly, she was smiling, but her eyes were 2 black holes. A beautiful story, a conspiracy board, a few travel expenses, a server glitch. You've presented nothing but malice and coincidence. Board members, this is what I was referring to, a fixation, an obsession. It's sad. She was good. She was turning it back. She was planting the seed of doubt, painting me as the unhinged, obsessive daughter. I looked at my laptop. You're right, Ms. Cross. Coincidence is hard to prove. Malice is subjective. Let's try intent. I tapped the spacebar. The screen split. On the left, the data map of the fraud. On the right, a simple black audio player. You mentioned I was disgruntled, I said. It's true. I was deactivated this morning, so I came in as a visitor. I was on the 14th floor at 10:14 a.m., just as you were speaking with Mr. Harris, the CFO. Vivian's face did not change, but the color drained. She went from pale to a waxy, translucent gray. I hit play. The crystal-clear audio of my pen recorder filled the tomb-like silence of the Northlight room. Vivian's voice, recorded. Don't care what the legal email said. Their preservation notice is for the idiots in sales. I want you to go to the terminal, you, personally, and delete the drafts. Wipe the entire sandbox." Harris's voice, recorded terrified. "Wipe it? That's active destruction of evidence. Vivian, they'll know." Vivian's voice, recorded full of acid. "It's housekeeping. Do it, now, and then bleach the drive." I hit stop. The only sound in the room was the faint hum of the server in the credenza. Every director was frozen, staring at the speaker icon on the screen. Arthur Hayes had his eyes closed, his hand pinching the bridge of his nose. Vivian Cross looked gone. The mask was not just cracked, it had disintegrated. She was looking at me with a raw, naked, animalistic horror. My father was staring at her. The look on his face was not rage. It was comprehension. The look of a king who has just realized his most trusted general is the one who poisoned the well. "That," Arthur Hayes said, his voice a hoarse whisper, "was recorded this morning, after the court order." "Yes," I said. "An active, willful, and documented conspiracy to destroy evidence currently under a judicial preservation order, obstruction of justice, a federal crime, which, I believe," I said, glancing at my watch, "was also detailed in an addendum I sent to the district attorney's office about 45 minutes ago." Knock, knock. The sound at the frosted glass door was soft, polite. The door opened. Two people, a man and a woman. They were not in uniform. They were in dark, unremarkable, off-the-rack suits. They looked like auditors. They looked like couriers. They looked like the two most dangerous people in the world. The woman held up a badge, enclosed in a leather wallet. "Mr. Hayes?" she said, her voice polite, addressing the lead director, not the CEO. "We're investigators from the district attorney's office, white-collar division. We have a warrant to seize the C&B servers, and we would like to ask Mr. Graham Mercer and Ms. Vivian Cross to come with us to answer a few questions." Vivian made a small sound, a tiny strangled gasp. My father? My father didn't move. He didn't look at the investigators. He didn't look at the board. He looked at me. He finally, truly looked at me. The unstable girl, the junior analyst, the noise. And in his eyes, I saw the entire 17-story glass tower come crashing down. He didn't see anger. He didn't see betrayal. He saw the cold, perfect, logical conclusion. He saw the fire escape I had been building for a year, and he saw that I had just led the entire world down it. He saw the chessboard, and he realized he'd been in checkmate since I stood up in court. The game was over. He had lost. The investigators moved forward, past the walnut table. "Mr. Mercer? Ms. Cross? Please, stand up." Vivian began to shake. My father stood up, slowly, mechanically. He smoothed the front of his bespoke jacket. I didn't smile. I didn't feel a rush of triumph. I didn't feel anything at all. I just felt the end of the calculation, the equal sign. I stood by the monitor, my laptop in my hand. I didn't turn to watch them go. I just kept my back straight. The clock on my laptop's taskbar read 10:59 A. I was in my apartment, the one overlooking the docks, the same small rented box where I had built the weapon. The air smelled of old coffee and the faint, metallic scent of the harbor. The only sound in the room was the click of the analog clock on my wall. Tick, tock, tick, tock. It was a loud, hollow, unforgiving sound. I was watching a single browser tab, the Hollis County Court Public Access Portal, Case 774B, Hollis v. Mercer. The page was static. My hand was on the mouse, my index finger resting on the F5 key. Tick, tock. My heart was beating in time with the clock, a slow, heavy, pressurized rhythm. I knew what was supposed to happen. After yesterday's boardroom meeting, after the arrests, Arthur Hayes, the new acting CEO, had made one call. It was to the DA's office, pledging full cooperation. The second call was to the court. The C&B Board of Directors, in an emergency session, had voted to waive all corporate privilege, unsealing the evidence. The judge, my father's lawyer, the DA, they were all in agreement. The fraud was too big to be contained in a divorce proceeding. It was public now. My mind drifted from the screen, back to yesterday afternoon, back to the Northlight boardroom. The knock at the frosted glass door still echoed in my ears. I remembered the silence after the investigators entered. I remembered watching my father's face. He had looked at me, and I had seen the recognition, the final, terrible understanding. Then, he had looked away. He had looked at Vivian. The investigators were polite. "Ms. Cross, if you would, please." Vivian Cross, the woman who had glided through the glass tower like a queen, the woman who had warned me about curiosity, stood up. She was a machine that had been EMP'd. Her movements were jerky, disconnected. Her face was not pale. It was the color of ash. She tried to grab her purse from the floor. Her hand fumbled, brushing against the lapel of her black dress. A small, platinum brooch, one I hadn't noticed before, came loose. It wasn't a logo. It was a minimalist, abstract shape, like a bent nail. It fell onto the dark, polished surface of the walnut table. Clink, skitter, spin. The sound was tiny, sharp, and obscenely loud in the absolute silence. It spun like a spent coin, a final, metallic full stop. No one moved to pick it up. Vivian just stared at it, her mouth slightly open. The investigators gently, firmly, took her arm. "This way, ma'am." She was led out, not in handcuffs, not yet, not here. But it was worse. She was flanked, escorted, removed. She looked like a ghost being exorcised from the building she had haunted. My father was next. "Mr. Mercer, we need you to come with us." He stood. He adjusted his suit jacket, pulling the lapels straight with a sharp tug. A final, reflexive act of dominance. He did not look at me. He looked at Arthur Hayes, the new king, the man who had invited me. "Arthur," my father said, his voice a gravelly rasp, "this is a fabrication, a corporate coup based on a child's fantasy. You've destroyed this company." Arthur Hayes, his face carved granite, looked back at him. "The company was already destroyed. Graham, you just built such a beautiful building on top of the rot. None of us could smell it." He gestured to the investigators. "Go with them." My father walked out. His back was rigid, his footsteps heavy. The door to the Northlight room closed with a soft, hydraulic hiss, leaving the remaining board members in a stunned, toxic silence. I turned to the table, to the small, spinning platinum brooch. I picked it up. It was cold. I placed it in the center of the dark walnut, a perfect, solitary artifact of the collapse. Then I gathered my laptop. I walked out of the room. I didn't say thank you. I didn't say a word. I just walked. My footsteps muffled by the thick wool carpet, leaving them all behind in the tomb. Tick-tock. My eyes snapped back to the present, my apartment, the laptop screen. The clock on the wall clicked over. The numbers on my taskbar changed. 1100 a.m. I pressed the F5 key. The page refreshed. It was there. A new line item, right at the top, Case 774B, Hollis v. Mercer. Motion. Plaintiff and defendant joint motion to unseal exhibits 3A-3G, approved. And beneath it, a blue hyperlink, clean and simple as a blade. View. Exhibit 3A. Mercer Cross Scheme. Submitted factual affidavit and supporting documentation. Public release. Redacted. It was my letter. My 3:17 a.m. letter. My data. My flowcharts. My truth. It was live. It was public. It was forever. My phone, sitting on the table beside the laptop, began to vibrate. It didn't ring. It just started to buzz against the wood with a low, angry, insistent bzzzt. It was the first news alert. Bryn Mawr Financial Journal. Breaking. CNB CEO Mercer, VP Cross, arrested in multi-million-dollar fraud scheme. Trading remains halted. Bzzzt. Another. Writers. Calder and Bray. Systems facing imminent SEC investigation. DA's office confirms. Stock frozen. Bzzzt. Another. Associated Press. CNB Systems Board convenes emergency session. Suspends CEO Graham Mercer. Independent Director Arthur Hayes named acting CEO. I watched the phone vibrate, a frantic, dying insect on the tabletop. The dominoes were falling, exactly as the data said they must. The world was catching up to the facts. The stock, which had been halted, a pause, was now frozen. A stop. The difference between a coma and a death certificate. The board's press release was fast. They were cutting him loose, cauterizing the wound. Arthur Hayes was smart. He was distancing the company from the men who had run it. Full cooperation, the release said. A new chapter of transparency. Bzzz. It wasn't a news alert, it was a text message. From a number I didn't have saved, but I knew. Malik. Just saw the 11 a.m. filing. Hell of a show. Rain, you just open-sourced a corporate takedown. I smiled. The first real expression I'd felt in days. Malik. FYI, the DA's forensic team is plugged directly into the core now. I opened all the firewalls for them and gave them my root key. They're not just looking at the sandbox. They're taking the whole damn castle. The rest of the road is theirs. They got it from here. Me. Good. Thank you, Malik, for everything. Malik. They're not the only ones who can engineer integrity. I closed the phone. The buzzing stopped. Silence. It was over. The click-clack of the keyboard, the 3:17 a.m. vigil, the server room's cold hum, the terror in the courtroom, the ice in the boardroom. It was all done. The calculation had been solved. I stood up. My back ached. I had been coiled like a spring for so long. I wasn't sure how to stand straight. I left my apartment. I walked down the echoing concrete stairs and pushed open the heavy steel door to the street. The air hit me like a splash of cold water. The city was clean. The sky, which for days had been a low, gray, oppressive ceiling of drizzle, had broken. A sharp, autumnal wind had blown the smog and the clouds out to sea. The sun was brilliant. The sky a deep, piercing, almost violent blue. It was as if the whole of Bryn Mawr had been holding its breath and had finally, collectively, exhaled. I walked for blocks, no destination in mind, just moving. I walked until my legs ached. I ended up at the small, independent coffee shop 2 blocks from the CNB Tower, the one where I had sat yesterday, a visitor in my own life. I walked inside. The smell of burnt beans and steamed milk was grounding. Just a large coffee, I said. Black? The barista handed me the cup. It was scalding hot, the heat radiating through the cardboard. I took it outside and sat at one of the small, cold metal tables on the sidewalk. I looked at the tower. It was still there. 17 stories of glass and steel, gleaming in the sharp, clean light. It was a beautiful building, but it was just a building. The ghosts had been evicted. I looked down at the massive, 40-foot LED wall that dominated the lobby. Yesterday, it had been a frantic, blood-red bar of trading halted. Today, it was just black. The screen was off. The motto, integrity engineered, was gone. The tower was finally, blessedly, silent. I took a sip of the coffee. It was scalding and shockingly bitter. It tasted like the truth. It was the most satisfying thing I'd ever had. I sat there, in the clean, cold sunlight, and I drank it all. I found her in a diner near the courthouse, a small, 24-hour place called the Aegean. It smelled of old cooking oil, bleach, and the kind of burnt, watery coffee that fuels bad decisions. The lighting was a warm, greasy yellow, a stark contrast to the blue-green surgical theater of the court and the cold, white fire of the C&B tower. She was in a booth in the back, by the rattling kitchen doors. She had a bowl of chicken noodle soup in front of her, the steam rising in a thin, lazy spiral. She hadn't touched it. I slid onto the vinyl bench opposite her. The cracked red plastic hissed under my weight. She jumped, her hand flying to her chest, spilling a few drops of water from the glass she'd been holding. Her hands. They were still shaking. It wasn't the rapid, high-frequency vibration I'd seen in the courtroom, the one fueled by adrenaline and terror. This was a deeper, slower tremor. The tremor of withdrawal. The shaking of a body that had been running on cortisol and fear for 30 years and had suddenly, finally been allowed to stop. "Rain," she whispered. Her voice was a dry rasp, as if she'd been swallowing sand. I didn't say anything. I just watched her try to lift the water glass. Her fingers, thin and elegant, couldn't get a firm grip. She put her hand down, hiding it in her lap. "The lawyer called," she said, staring at the soup. He said, they arrested Graham, and Vivian, he said they're holding them." "I know," I said. She finally, slowly, lifted her head. Her eyes were puffy, red-rimmed, and clear. All the fog, all the fear, all the practiced denial was gone. She was just there, present. "You don't owe me an explanation, Rain," she said, and the words came out rough, heavy. I should not have. I never should have let him." "It's not your fault," I said. It was the first thing that came to mind, and it was the truest. It was never your fault. I reached into the messenger bag I was carrying. I pulled out a 9x12 manila envelope. It was a clean copy of the one I had sent to the judge, the letter, the flowchart, the affidavits. I slid it across the Formica table. It stopped next to her untouched bowl of soup. "I didn't do it for the company," I said, my voice quiet, matching hers. "I didn't do it for the board. I did it because of what he said to you, because of what he threatened. I did it, because you did not deserve to be humiliated, not anymore." She looked at the envelope. She looked at its metal clasp, at the neatly printed label. She didn't open it. She didn't have to. She had lived the contents of it. Her shaking hand came out of her lap. She didn't try to grip anything. She just laid her palm flat on the envelope. A gesture of acceptance, of acknowledgement. She just rested her hand on the weight of the truth. She nodded. Once, a small, tight movement. Then she turned her head and looked out the diner window. There was nothing to see but a brick wall and a parked delivery truck. But she stared at it, as if it were an ocean. She was looking at the first day of a life she had never planned for. My phone, which I had placed face down on the table, began to vibrate. The sound was shockingly loud on the hard table. It sounded like an angry, trapped hornet. My mother flinched, her eyes snapping back from the window. We both looked at the black, vibrating rectangle. I didn't have to check. I knew. It kept vibrating. A long, demanding, furious summons. The sound of a man who was used to the world answering him. I let it ring. My mother and I just watched it. I let his rage, his panic, his final, useless demand for my attention fill the space between us. I let it vibrate until it choked on its own fury and stopped. The silence that fell in its wake was deep and clean. My mother let out a small, shuddering breath. A second later, the phone pinged. Once, a text message. I picked it up. I turned it over. The screen lit up. One new message. Graham Mercer. I opened it. The words were stark. "You have destroyed everything." I looked at the message. I thought of the glass tower. I thought of the integrity-engineered motto. I thought of the shadow books, the kickbacks, the slush fund, the plan to steal the data and flee to the Caymans. I thought of the hollowed-out rot he had hidden inside that beautiful, polished shell. I typed a reply. My fingers were steady. I didn't destroy it. I just turned on the lights. I hit send. Then I powered the phone off completely. The screen went black. I placed it back on the table. The reckoning was complete. My mother was watching me, her gaze intense. The waitress came by and refilled my coffee cup without asking. The smell of the bitter black liquid rose up. "Rain," my mother said, her voice stronger now. "Your job at the company." "What?" "I resigned," I said. I had emailed my resignation to Arthur Hayes from the coffee shop. A single sentence. "I am no longer an employee of Calder and Bray Systems." "You resigned?" She looked, not scared, but confused. It was the last piece of the old world. "But you did what you were supposed to. You told the truth. Arthur Hayes. He knows you saved them." I took a sip of the coffee. It was still scalding, still bitter. "He does," I said, "but it doesn't matter. I can't stay there." "What will you do?" I looked at her, at the woman who was finally emerging from the wreckage. "I want a job where you don't have to whisper. I want to do what I just did. But this time, I want to do it from the outside." I set the cup down. "I want to work at a place where, when you find the truth, people don't cover their ears. They write it down. They publish it." My mother stared at me. Her hands were still. They were resting, one on the envelope, one in her lap. The shaking had, at last, stopped. She looked at me, Rain Mercer, her daughter, the unstable girl, the junior analyst, the noise, and she nodded. It was not a small nod this time. It was a slow, deep, profound gesture of understanding, a movement of release, her shoulders, which I had only ever seen held in a tight, tense line, slumped, just a fraction. She let out a breath. It was a breath she had been holding for 30 years. It was the sound of a pressurized seal on a glass jar finally, painfully, blessedly, breaking. The sound of the pressure inside finally equalizing with the world outside. She looked down at the soup, then she picked up her spoon, her hand perfectly steady, and began to eat. We were back in Department 3B. It was 3 days after the arrests. The room, which had been a theater of explosive drama, was now a cold, sterile processing center. The gallery was empty, save for me in the back row and 2 stone-faced court reporters. The energy was gone. This was not a trial. It was an execution of paperwork. My father was at the defendant's table. He was not the CEO of Calder and Bray. He was just Graham Mercer, a man in an ill-fitting suit I didn't recognize, his hair unkempt, his face a gray, stubbled mask. He was flanked by a new lawyer, a fast-talking criminal defender with a tired, rumpled look. My mother was at the plaintiff's table. She wore a simple blue dress. Her hands were folded on the table in front of her. They were not shaking. I sat in the back, my bag at my feet. I was not a witness today. I was not an analyst. I was just an observer, watching the final lines of the equation be drawn. Judge Miriam Keats entered. The all-rise was a formality, devoid of passion. She sat and put on her glasses. She was not looking at my letter. She was reading from a new, thick document, her order. "In the matter of Hollis v. Mercer," she began, her voice a flat, dry monotone. "And in light of the extraordinary evidence presented to this court, which has now been unsealed and corroborated by the acting board of Calder and Bray Systems and the district attorney's office, this court issues the following temporary orders, effective immediately." This was the clean cut from the outline, the scalpel. "On the emergency preservation of assets is hereby made permanent, pending the full dissolution of the marital estate. All listed accounts, domestic and international, are to remain frozen. 2. The plaintiff's motion for immediate and full spousal support is granted. Calder and Bray's benefits administrator is ordered to reinstate Helen Mercer's medical insurance, retroactively, with all costs, including infusions and specialist care, to be paid directly from the defendant's frozen compensation accounts. 3. A temporary restraining order is granted. Graham Mercer is prohibited from contacting, harassing, threatening, or approaching within 500 yards of the plaintiff, Helen Mercer, and the witness, Rain Mercer." I saw my father's head snap up. The word witness had stung him. This is based, Judge Keats continued, on the defendant's documented threats regarding medical care and his aggressive physical lunge toward the plaintiff in this courtroom. This order applies to all forms of communication, in person, by phone, by text, by email, or through any third party. She had cut him off. She had taken away his money, his power, and his voice. She paused, looking up, not at my father, but at his new, tired lawyer. Before we proceed, I want to make a note for the record regarding the evidence submitted by Ms. Rain Mercer. This I had not expected. This court, she said, her voice sharpening, becoming the voice of the woman who had laughed at the lie, has reviewed the nature of the submission. While unorthodox, the evidence, which constitutes a high-level whistleblower report of ongoing financial crimes, was submitted under duress and in the interest of preventing further, immediate, and irreparable harm to the plaintiff. She was cleaning it. She was protecting the evidence, protecting me. Furthermore, the acting board of Calder and Bray has since waived all corporate privilege regarding this data, and the state, in the form of the district attorney, has formally joined the petition to have it entered into evidence. This court therefore finds that the submission was not an improper ex parte communication, but a valid and necessary disclosure in the public interest. The witness, Rain Mercer, acted within her rights and, given the circumstances, her civic duties. My father's new lawyer, who was being paid by the hour from a fast-dwindling retainer, was smart enough to stay silent. My father was not. "Lies," he rasped, his voice a dry croak. He started to rise, his hand gripping the table. "It's all lies. She—" Thwack! His lawyer's hand, which had been resting on his arm, clamped down. The lawyer didn't look at him. He just yanked. A short, violent downward pull. It was the most brutal, efficient gesture I had ever seen. It said, "Shut up. You are no longer in charge." My father crumpled back into his chair, a puppet with its strings cut, his mouth hanging open. Judge Keats watched him, her face impassive. She watched this titan of industry be physically silenced by a rumpled public defender. Then, she did something that chilled me to the bone. She looked past the lawyers, past the tables. Her eyes scanned the empty gallery until they found me, sitting alone in the last row. Our eyes met. There was no warmth, there was no pity. It was a look of pure, unadulterated acknowledgement. It was the look of a blacksmith checking the temper of a blade. "Ms. Mercer," she said, her voice projecting across the empty room, "this court recognizes the professional and personal cost of your actions." She held my gaze. "You chose the hard path, and you chose the right one. Do not let anyone tell you otherwise." She had just given me my absolution and my marching orders, in 2 sentences. She broke eye contact and looked back at her desk. "Finally," she said, "pursuant to the ongoing criminal investigation, this court hereby transfers the entirety of the unsealed exhibits and all related motions to the Superior Court of this county, Criminal Division, for the prosecution of the people vs. Graham Mercer and Vivian Cross." She picked up a file, a thick, heavy, terrifying file, and handed it to her clerk. "Transmitted." Bang! The gavel fell. "We are adjourned." It was over. The clean cut was complete. My mother was immediately surrounded by her lawyer and a victim's advocate, and ushered out a private side door. My father was told to stay put by his lawyer, who went to argue with the clerk. I stood up, and I heard it, the click-swoosh-click of DSLR cameras, the low, animal roar of a crowd. I looked at the main doors of the courtroom. They were pushed open. A mob of reporters, photographers, and cameramen were packed into the hallway, held back by a single, overwhelmed court officer. They had been waiting for the bang of the gavel. "Ms. Mercer, Rain, a comment. Did your father threaten you? Are you the source for the SEC filing? How does it feel to take down your own father's company?" They shouted at me, a wall of noise and flashing lights. I turned and walked the other way. I pushed open the heavy steel door to the emergency stairwell. Clang. The door shut, and the noise of the press was cut off, instantly. I was alone, in the echoing, concrete silence of the stairwell. The only sound was my own breathing. The air smelled of dust, old paint, and the faint, metallic scent of the fire extinguisher on the wall. I leaned against the cool, cinder-block wall on the landing. It was the first time I had been truly alone, with no task, no clock, no threat. I couldn't remember. I heard a sound. Click, clack, click, clack, click, clack. It was the sound of expensive heels on the concrete steps. Below me, it was fast, frantic, retreating. Someone was hurrying down the stairs, away from the courtroom, away from the press. I knew that sound. I knew that rhythm. It was Vivian Cross. She must have been in another courtroom, processing her release on bail, and was now fleeing the building, just like me. I didn't move. I just listened. Click, clack, click, clack. The sound got fainter, echoing up the concrete shaft. Fainter, fainter. It was the sound of a star actress, her makeup running, her costume torn, scurrying out the stage door after the play has collapsed into a disaster. It was the sound of an exit. Then, silence. I was alone again. I stayed on that landing for a long time. Then I pulled out my phone, the one I had bought 2 days ago, a cheap, anonymous burner. I had powered on my old phone only once to transfer my contacts. I had 2 emails to send. I opened a new message. 2. Arthur. Hayes at Calderbray. Com. Acting CEO. Subject. Resignation. Mr. Hayes, please accept this as my formal, immediate resignation from my position as risk analyst at Calder and Bray Systems. It was a pleasure working with you. Rain Mercer. I hit send. I was unemployed. I opened a second email. 2. T. Feldman at brynmarday.org, lead investigator. Subject. CNB, full data transfer and key. Investigator Feldman, as requested. Attached is my finalized affidavit, the full access key to the master data room, and all audio files, including the recording of Vivian Cross and the CFO. My personal access logs are included as a CSV. The data is all there. The rest of the road is yours. Rain Mercer. I attached the files. I hit send. I had just handed over the keys to the castle. My part was done. I was no longer the analyst. I was no longer the custodian. I was just Rain. I powered off the burner phone and put it in my bag. I turned on my old phone, the one that had been off since the diner. The screen lit up. It was flooded. 142 new emails, 99 text messages. Most of it was noise, old alerts from C&B, panicked texts from former colleagues, threatening DMs from anonymous stock traders. I hit select all and delete. I cleared the entire inbox, wiped it clean, a fresh start. My phone pinged. A new email had just pushed through, arriving in the clean, empty space. From Sarah. Jensen at Corporate Ethics Watch.org. Subject, your analysis. I knew the name, Sarah Jensen. She was the executive director of the Corporate Ethics Watch, a national, nonprofit watchdog group. They were famous for their forensic analyses of corporate filings, the ones they published in the journal. They were, in short, what I wanted to be when I grew up. I opened it. Dear Miss Mercer, I've just read the 11 o'clock a.m. public filing from your court case. I have never seen a clearer, more elegant, or more devastating piece of forensic accounting from an internal source. I know you're in the middle of a storm right now, but when the dust settles and you find yourself thinking about what's next, please give me a call. The world needs fewer analysts who polish glass, and more who know how to break it when they have to. My direct line is below. Sarah. I read the email. Once? Twice? I looked at the words. Elegant. Devastating. Analysis. She wasn't offering me a job because I was a source. She wasn't offering me a job because of the drama. She was offering me a job because of my work. I stood there, on the dusty, silent stairwell landing, the smell of old paint in my nose. And for the first time in my entire analytical, logical, suppressed life, I smiled. It wasn't a big smile. It was a small, sharp, tired smile. But it was real. It was a smile just for me. The calculation was over. And I had solved for X. I didn't leave through the stairwell. I walked back out into the main atrium of the courthouse. The press mob had been cleared, pushed back out onto the front steps by a reinforced line of court officers. The grand, marble-floored hall was almost empty now, washed in the weak, late afternoon sunlight that slanted through the high, arched windows. I stopped in front of a wide glass corridor that connected the old building to the new annex. For a long moment, I just stood there, looking at the glass. I could see my reflection. It was just me. Rain Mercer, a woman in a dark blazer and gray slacks, holding a messenger bag. My hair was tied back in the same severe knot I always wore, but a few strands had come loose, softening the look. I looked tired. I looked pale. But the woman in the glass was not the same one who had walked in here. I held up my hand, the one that had shaken so violently when I signed my name. I held it up to the glass, palm out. It was perfectly, absolutely beautifully steady. The trembling was gone. It's a strange thing, isn't it? The voice, dry and precise, made me turn. Judge Miriam Keats was standing a few feet away, holding a thin briefcase. She was out of her robes, dressed in a simple, practical gray pantsuit. She looked, I thought, like a bird, small, sharp, and missing nothing. I didn't know what to say. Your Honor. She walked to stand beside me, looking not at me, but out the window with me. We stared at the empty courtyard, at the reflection of the marble pillars on the glass. The laugh, she said, as if in the middle of a conversation we'd been having for hours. In the courtroom, the first one. I nodded, remembering, the dry, sharp bark that had broken the tension. I wasn't laughing at you, she said. I wasn't laughing at your father's theatrics. I was laughing at the lie. It was just so clumsy. She turned her head, and her sharp, intelligent eyes met mine. All my years on this bench, I've seen liars, liars who are brilliant, liars who are stupid, liars who are desperate. They build these intricate, delicate structures of deceit, trying to hide. But your father, he and Ms. Cross, they built a skyscraper of lies and then got angry that someone noticed the foundation was made of wet paper. She shook her head, a small, quick movement of professional disdain. It was the arrogance, the sheer, clumsy audacity. That's what I was laughing at. I finally found my voice. It was quiet. Thank you for reading the letter, Your Honor. She looked at me, and her expression softened. Just a fraction. It wasn't pity. It was respect. Thank you for writing it, Ms. Mercer, she replied. She held my gaze for one beat more, a final, silent acknowledgement. Then she nodded, once, and walked away, her practical shoes making a small, sharp, decisive sound on the marble. I watched her go. I pulled out my new, clean phone, the one that wasn't a burner, the one I had bought to start over. I opened my messages. One contact. Mom. I typed 2 words. It's done. I hit send. A second later, the 3 little dots appeared. She was typing. They vanished. They reappeared. She was trying to find the words. Then my screen lit up with a single, simple, perfect notification. A red heart. That was all. It was everything. The phone in my hand suddenly began to vibrate, a violent, angry, desperate buzzing. The screen lit up. Graham Mercer. I looked at his name, the man who had roared at my mother, the man who had dismissed me as noise, the man who, even now, from a holding cell, was trying to command me, to summon me, to make me react. I didn't decline the call. I didn't silence it. I pressed the I for information. I scrolled down. I found the option. Block this caller. I pressed it. A confirmation screen appeared. You will not receive phone calls, messages, or FaceTime from people on the block list. I pressed block contact. His name vanished from my screen. The buzzing stopped. I took a deep, clean breath. I walked across the atrium, my footsteps echoing in the vast, empty space. I reached the main entrance, a set of towering, heavy glass doors. I put my hand on the steel push bar. I pushed. The door opened, and the city hit me. It wasn't a gentle welcome. It was a raw, sharp, sudden rush of life. The wind, blowing in from the Bryn River, was cold and carried the distinct, briny metallic smell of the docks. It smelled like the air at 4 o'clock a.m., the air I had breathed after I sent the letter. It smelled like iron. The sound was a roar, the rumble of buses, the distant wail of a siren, the chatter of people on the sidewalk, all of them blessedly ignorant of the war that had just been concluded inside. I stood on the top step, letting the wind hit my face, cleaning the last of the courtroom's stale air from my lungs. Out of habit, I looked to my left. There it was, 2 miles away, but dominating the skyline, as it always did, the Calder & Bray Tower. The sun was beginning to set, and the light was hitting the 17 stories of glass at a sharp angle. It was magnificent. It glittered. It looked like a column of pure, white, unbroken fire. It looked perfect. But I knew the truth. I knew that inside that glittering facade, the power was off. The CEO was in a cell. The VP was out on bail, her career a smoking crater. The board was in a panic. The stock was delisted, and the investigators were walking the halls. It was a beautiful, shining, hollowed-out shell. It was a house of mirrors that had been shattered from the inside. I turned away from it. I walked down the broad, granite steps to the sidewalk. I reached into my bag, my fingers brushing past the new, clean phone. They closed around a small plastic rectangle. My Calder & Bray Systems employee ID card. My face, 3 years younger, stared up at me. Rain Mercer, risk analyst. It had my father's signature on the back, the digital, authorizing signature of the CEO. I walked to the corner. There was a city-issued trash can, a heavy metal cylinder, bolted to the concrete next to a lamppost. I held the card over the opening. I thought of the elevator. I thought of the fire escape. I let it go. It didn't make a sound. It just vanished into the darkness inside, joining the coffee cups and discarded newspapers. The black screen in my mind, the one that had been running the endless looping code of the fraud, the timelines, the fear, the anger, it just turned off. The high, ringing tension that I had lived with for a year finally went silent. The final bell had rung, and I walked away, into the cold, clean wind, and I did not look back. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop a comment below so we can connect, and you can share your thoughts. Please be sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and if you want to help this story reach more people, you can support us by hitting the hype button.